Hey, what's up guys, it's Bakes, and in today's video I plan on making a series of videos going forward which will be part of my ranked series that I feature up here on my channel, where I rank every album that I've done a random album review video for up here on my channel, from my least favourite to favourite. But before we get into the main content and the meat of it all, I thought I'd better do a proper introduction to how this series is going to work going forward. If you feel like you don't need an intro and you just want to get into it, I'll put a spot in the time bar below for you to skip ahead, that's fine. But as I said, I think it's better off that I quickly explain how I hope this series will go. So, first of all, if you've never been on my channel before, or particularly never watched my music content, this could be completely foreign to you because I'm going to be talking about albums that I have done reviews of on my channel before. I have this series called my random album reviews, where I grab an album off my shelf, talk about it a little bit, my history with the album, my likes and dislikes, and then give it a rating out of 10. I have done 10 episodes of my random album reviews, which first of all, it feels like I've done way more, but I've done 10. And now that I've done 10, it's a nice round number, and I thought it would be fun to rank the 10 albums that I've featured in that series so far from my least favourite to favourite. And then once I do another 10, I will do another video on them, and then eventually I'll have 20 and rank them from my least favourite to favourite. The next time I do this series again, I will have another 10, which will make 30, and I'll rank them from my least favourite to favourite, and that's how the series is going to continue on and on and on. But as I said, there's 10 for now. If you are unfamiliar with my random album review series, feel free to go check out those videos so you are prepared for what albums are going to come up on this list. But otherwise, you know, you might just hear an album here today and it might pique your interest and you can go check out those videos later. But let's get into it now, because this introduction, I don't want it to go too long, but I thought it's better off to give you guys a heads up for how I want this series to work going forwards. So starting off my list, coming in at my number 10, which is last place, I have the album Blush by the band Moose Blood. Now, when I reviewed this album, I gave it an original score of 5 out of 10, so very much in the middle for me. And to be honest, looking back, that is a very generous 5 out of 10. I don't often come back to this album a lot. I need to be in a very particular mood to enjoy this one from start to finish. Yes, there are great songs on this album that I consider close to 10 out of 10, you know, Honey and Knuckles, but 2 tracks, you know, isn't enough to carry this album. Don't get me wrong, some songs in the back catalogue are fine, but fine isn't going to have it anything higher on this list. When I reviewed this album, I sort of also spoke about how it is more of just a reminder of the type of music that I was enjoying at the time. This album came out in 2016, so I would have been 15. Listening to this album, you know, I was waiting for it to drop, tried to get my hands on it as quick as possible, and by all means, you know, it's not a terrible album. 5 out of 10 is, as I said, right in the middle, just about average, but compared to the other albums that I've featured in my random album reviews, this is going to be my last place. So coming in at number 10 is Blush by the band Moose Blood. And coming in at my number 9 is actually the most recent album that I've featured in my random album review series. Here we have Eternal Blue by the band Spiritbox. Now, this is a modern album that a lot of the fans of the subgenre really seem to enjoy. When I reviewed this album, I originally gave it a score of a 6 out of 10, which, to be completely fair, that is a score that's probably not deserving of. It's a much better album than a 6 out of 10. However, when I give my ratings out of 10, a lot of it is just personal preference, you know, how much I replay the album and how much I come back to it and how much I personally enjoy it goes very much into that score. So as I said, it's an album that is deserving more of a 6, but I don't often come back to this album very much, even though it is still a pretty new album. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot to enjoy here. This is the band's debut album, and I see them just progressing from here. When the songs are at their peak, man, this album's really fucking good. Unfortunately, there just isn't a lot of consistency, especially towards the back catalogue of this album. And as I said, just a lot of personal taste comes into it too. By all means, don't hate this album, just like Blush beforehand. But again, not one I come back to too often. A 6 out of 10 originally, it's probably at a 6.5 now. But coming in at my number 9 is Eternal Blue by Spiritbox. So coming in at my number 8 is the third full-length album by Beartooth titled Disease. Now this was a fun one to get for my random album reviews. For those who are unfamiliar to why my random album reviews are random, I do a random number generator, and whatever number that is, I pull that off my shelf, so I don't really pick. But this was a fun one to go back and check out. To me, this has always been an album where I'm like, it's Beartooth past their peak. There are some okay songs, but overall it's not really one I come back to quite often. And to be fair, a lot of that I still stand by. However, this one surprised me. It was much better than what I remembered it being. As I said, there isn't tons of consistency, but man, some of these songs on here really pack a punch. Manipulation and Infection are two that come to mind right away, which I really enjoy. And this probably is Beartooth's second best album, where they have 4 albums to date currently. I probably could have had this at last or second last, but this is definitely a safe bet for second, just off the top of my head at the moment. I originally gave this a score of a 6.5, and kind of like the previous 2 that I've already featured here, this isn't one still that I come back to quite as often. Yes, it surprised me again with how much I probably underrated this album, but still I don't come back to it too often, especially since, as I said, this is past Beartooth's peak. If I want to listen to Prime Beartooth, I'll go to different albums, but by all means, Disease, relatively enjoyable, but coming in at my number 8. So coming in at my number 7 is the album California from Blink-182. Now this album is probably most well known for being the one where Tom left and Matt Skiba joined to take his place, even though now Tom is back. At the time, that was probably what this album was most known for. When I reviewed this album, I think I used a term that I like to use when talking about albums like this. And the term that I sometimes use is fast food albums or cheeseburger albums. And that's pretty much what this is. There isn't a lot of substance. Having too much of it is probably not good for you. But for a one-time thing and changing it up, it's quite nice. This album can be fun. I love Blink-182. I'm not alone in that. A lot of people love this band, but they're one of my favorites of all time. So I will often go back and listen to any of their albums, even though, to be fair, California is definitely in their lower half of discography. This is easily probably their worst modern album, but I would be lying if, as I said, I don't come back to this album every now and then and get enjoyment from it. I originally gave this one a score of a 7 out of 10, kind of like when I was speaking about Blush. It's a generous score, but as I said, a little bit of my heart goes into that rating because, as I said, maybe not a great album, but I love Blink. This album is fun at times. As I said, maybe not a lot of substance, but coming in at my number 7 for now is California by Blink-182. Moving on to my number 6, and here I have Vices and Virtues by Panic at the Disco. For me personally, this is Panic at the Disco's most underrated album, and even for myself, I underrated it for a long time. But man, this album for 10 tracks, it really does pack a lot of really good songs. This album's probably most notable for having the Ballad of Mona Lisa, which, to be fair, is a relatively solid song. Ready to Go was pretty popular as well, but man, so many classic songs on this album. I mean, Hurricane, Always, Calendar, Sarah Smiles, Nearly Witches. For a 10-track playlist, it is really, really solid. As I said, Panic at the Disco, in my opinion, their most underrated effort. And even though the band is actually folded now, for a long time Brendan Urie was doing Panic at the Disco all by himself and just releasing it under that title. A lot of the modern stuff, started to sort of drift away from what I was enjoying, and I was always kind of maybe a little bit hopeful that they would return to something like this, especially since more pop punk and that style of music is coming back into fashion again. I was hoping maybe a little bit of a return to form or return to their roots, but obviously I don't think that is really going to happen. I was slightly hopeful, even though, deep down I kind of felt like it was never going to happen. But either way, as I keep saying, their most underrated album, I originally gave this a 7.5 and pretty much holds up with that score. So coming in with my number 6 is Vices and Virtues by Panic at the Disco. Coming in at my number 5 is the album What Separates Me From You by the band A Day to Remember. Now, a lot of people, when talking about A Day to Remember, they would say that the album Homesick is the band's best effort, and by all means I do like Homesick, however I find it to be a little bit overrated. The band's best effort to me is What Separates Me From You, and if I was to introduce anyone to this band, this is the album I would show them. I just find it to be a perfect balance of the band's heavier and lighter stuff. For their heavy stuff, you got Sticks and Bricks, You Be Tails, I'll Be Sonic. For their lighter stuff, you got It's Complicated, If I Leave. You got plenty of popular songs on here as well, All I Want, All Signs Point to Lauderdale. And like Disease, this was an album that I was really happy to get randomly because it gave me a refreshing look at the album. As I said, I always enjoyed it, but just going back and reviewing this one and going back through each song again, the hooks on this album are so fucking good. Some of the catchiest hooks on any album that I can think of off the top of my head. This is just overall a really good effort, and for people that like Homesick, as I said, I'm not going to say that Homesick is a terrible album. Just me personally, I find it to be a little bit overrated. Maybe just go back and dip your toes in What Separates Me From You again, because this album really is really solid. What stops it from being any higher on this ranking, honestly, is I don't come back to this album very often, which is weird because I'm praising it a lot. There's just other bands that I prefer to go to, but whenever I'm listening to A Day to Remember, this is my go-to album from them. So coming in at my number 5 is What Separates Me From You. So my number 4 might be a shocker to some people, but here I have American Idiot by Green Day. This is my favorite Green Day album. I really do love this album. I mean that with my whole heart. But to be honest, this is probably more of an influential album than an album that I love. And as I said, I do love it, but as I said, it's more influential. This was probably my most listened to album from the ages 10 and below. I know this album back to front, and probably just hearing it so much through my whole life probably takes the rating just down a little bit, just because I've heard it so many times. But I don't want anyone to think I hate this album. I really do love it. So many good tracks, so many classic tracks. I mean, American Idiot, Jesus of Suburbia, Holiday, my personal favourite, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. This album really is great, but as I said, it's just a case of it being maybe a little bit more influential than, I don't know, maybe the influence just outweighs the love. I really don't know. It hurts me to say that because I really do love this album, and I don't want anyone to think that I don't. But coming in at my number 4 is American Idiot by Green Day. I originally gave it an 8.5 out of 10, which, even looking back, that just seems low, but I'm really struggling here. I do love this album, guys, but it's my number 4 for now. So moving into my top 3, and coming in at my 3rd place is From Under the Cork Tree by Fall Out Boy. Now, Fall Out Boy is arguably my favourite band of all time, 100% in my top 3, and this is just such a great album, and one that I've just grown to appreciate. I've always loved this album. It's a pop-punk classic. I mean, there is classic songs on this album. A Little Less 16 Candles, A Little More Touch Me, Dance Dance. I mean, who can forget Sugar We're Going Down? This album is great, and as I said, just found a new appreciation for it. Always liked it, but now it's just an album that I genuinely love. It's early Fall Out Boy, so the pop punk influences are much higher. The energy and that sort of raw and grittiness is there. But Patrick Stump is still smashing it out of the park with his vocals. All the instrumentals are great. Just an album that, again, just going back to revisit it for my random album review series, I just found a new appreciation for it, and I really do love it. As I said, Fall Out Boy, one of my favorite bands of all time. I could talk about this album forever, but I'm just going to make this one short and sharp. Coming in as my third place is From Under the Cork Tree by Fall Out Boy. Coming in at my number 2 is the album Disgusting by Beartooth. Now, if you want to talk about albums that are just so near perfect, this is a prime example. One of my favorite heavy albums that I have in my collection. This right from the start is just full of bangers. You have The Lines, Beaten in Lips, Body Bags, In Between. If you want to go to the second half of the album, you have I Have a Problem, One More, Me in My Own Head. The next one is such an underrated song, Keep Your American Dream. Rarely hear anyone bring that up. I rarely hear anybody bring this album up. When I was mentioning Beartooth earlier with their album Disease, I was talking about Beartooth at their pinnacle, and this is it. And it's crazy that they reached their pinnacle on their debut album. They set the bar so high, and unfortunately I don't think they'll ever pass it or sort of hit that peak again. Their albums, I still enjoy them, but they're slowly going down. But at least we have this one. As I said, whenever I want to listen to Beartooth, this is the go-to. As I said, an album that is near perfect. I originally gave it a 9 out of 10. I feel like it definitely deserves at least a 9.5. Near perfect, there's songs like Sick and Disgusting and Dead, which are fine, but I don't really care for. But that's 2 out of 12. Still such a solid album. So coming in at my number 2 is Disgusting by Beartooth. And here we go, guys, finally at my number 1 for this list. At least for now, we have Blink-182's self-titled album. Now, for a lot of people, they would say that this is Blink's most underrated effort, and I would agree, but Neighborhoods is out there, and I feel like Neighborhoods is the most unnecessarily hated Blink album. I feel like that album is actually pretty solid. It's not better than this, but it's their most underrated. But I'm getting off topic. This album is awesome. It's easily one of Blink's best. I would put it above Enema of the State, which I know a lot of people would say blasphemy, because Enema of the State is a lot of people's favorite Blink album. But for me, it's either between this or Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. This is Blink doing experimental stuff with their sound, but it still works so well. It's got Feel in this, which is one of my favorite, if not favorite, Blink-182 song of all time. It's got Always, it's got Down, it's got, of course, I Miss You, but there are so many underrated tracks on here too. You got Easy Target, Here's Your Letter, a song that I originally hated. All of This has grown on me also. This album is really incredible. And kind of like From Under the Cork Tree, this has always been an album that I've enjoyed and respected. But coming back to it for my random album reviews, I've just found a new appreciation for it. And before coming back to it for the random album reviews, I probably would have said Take Off Your Pants and Jacket was my number 1 Blink album, but right now it's neck and neck between the two. Both really good efforts, but as I said, this is my number 1 for all of the albums that I've ranked for my random album reviews so far, so it is taking my number 1 spot for this list. Alright guys, so now that we're through the rankings so far, I'm going to do a quick little recap, and then I'm going to talk about how I am going to relay how the list looks going into the next episode, so stick around for that as well. But a quick little recap for now. Coming in at my number 10 was Blush by Moose Blood. My number 9 was Eternal Blue by Spiritbox. My number 8 was Disease by Beartooth. Number 7 was California by Blink-182. My number 6 Vices and Virtues, Panic at the Disco. My number 5, A Day to Remember's What Separates Me From You. Number 4, American Idiot by Green Day. Number 3, From Under the Cork Tree, Fall Out Boy. Number 2 was Disgusting by Beartooth. And my number 1 for this list was Blink-182's Self-Titled. Now, I'm not going to do a recap after every one of these episodes in this series because, as I said, each episode I'm going to be adding 10 albums. So next episode there's going to be 20, and then the episode after that 30. And a lot of that is going to be repeating albums that you've seen, and it's going to take too long. So right now, or a little bit after this, I'm going to put up a little table, and that's how I'm going to keep track of the albums and their positioning. But also, every time I do one of these episodes, you might see the list change around without me talking about that in an episode, as in, I'll review the list and I'll be like, I haven't really been listening to this recently, and it's gone a little bit down for me over time, or I have been listening to it and it's gone a little bit up. So you'll see that list change around a little bit. Also on that table that will come up in a second on your screen, I have the original ratings, and a lot of the times you'll see albums that were originally rated higher or lower change in position. So for example, in this one you'll see I originally gave From Under the Cork Tree an 8 and American Idiot an 8.5, and they have swapped positions, so that will be a common occurrence as well. And I will relay this table at the start and finish of every episode in this series going on from here. So I will put that table up on screen now for you guys to see. So there we go, guys. Thank you for joining me for this first episode in this series. This will not be a frequently occurring series. It's not going to happen very often because, as I said, it's going to be after I do another 10 of my random album reviews, and if you guys know, sometimes they take me a fair while to get through. But as I said, I think this is going to be a fun series to recap and eventually keep track of every album that I've reviewed and ranking them from my least favorite to favorite, and it's going to be a fun journey. As I said, you're going to see album swap spots through the way, but by the end, it's going to be fun to have a look at what I would say are my top 10 albums. There are albums in my collection that I rate higher than my number 1 at the moment, but they're still yet to come up, so I'm excited to show you them. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this series. If you want to know my thoughts on any of these albums that I spoke about, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I have random album reviews out for them. I also have track list rankings out for them. That's where I rank every song on the album from my least favorite to favorite, so check out those videos as well. And this video, I'm sure, has been long enough, so I'll leave it there, guys. Thank you for joining me again, and I'll see you for another video in the future. Peace.